When I was 6, my parents told me I'd be staying with my grandparents for a while. To me, it sounded like a grand adventure. I loved their house. Grandma always had fresh cookies waiting, and she'd let me stay up late watching cartoons. Grandpa would take me to the garden to pick vegetables, even though I wasn't fond of them. I just enjoyed being with him. So when they said I'd live there temporarily, I was excited. I remember my mother being unusually silent that day. Her goodbye hug felt cold, almost robotic. My father was in a hurry, like he had somewhere urgent to be. When he dropped me off, he didn't even come inside, just gave a quick wave and drove away. At 6, I figured he was just busy. Kids don't see the full truth. I didn't realize I was being abandoned. At first, I kept asking Grandma when my parents would return. She'd smile and say, "Soon, dear." I think she believed it too at first, but days stretched into weeks, then months. Grandma stopped giving answers, just looked sad when I asked. Grandpa, usually so upbeat, would grumble under his breath whenever my parents came up in conversation. The truth came from my uncle, my father's younger brother, who never minced words. One day, while I was playing in the backyard, he sat me down on the swing set. He gently explained that my parents weren't coming back anytime soon. They thought it was best for me to stay here, he said. They needed to focus on my sister, who was very ill. Even at 6, that felt wrong. Why couldn't they care for both of us? Why was I sent away? He didn't have answers, and I could sense his frustration with them, even if he didn't say it. That night, I sobbed uncontrollably, the kind of crying that shakes your whole body. Grandma held me on the couch, rocking me gently, saying nothing, just letting me cry. That's when it sank in. They weren't coming back. Living with my grandparents wasn't bad, though. They were warm and loving, doing their best to keep things steady. But they were older, and raising a young child was tough. That's when my uncle and aunt stepped in more. My uncle, who had no kids, started visiting often. At first, he just helped out, fixing things, mowing the lawn, or taking me for ice cream when I seemed down. Over time, it became clear my grandparents couldn't manage full-time. My uncle and aunt offered to take me in. I didn't want to leave Grandma and Grandpa, but they explained it was for the best. "You'll still see us all the time," Grandma promised, and she was right. They lived just a few blocks away. Moving in with my uncle and aunt was a shift. I was used to my grandparents' slower pace, but my uncle and aunt had a different energy. They were stricter about things like bedtimes, but also more vibrant. My uncle played catch with me in the yard, and my aunt let me decorate cookies with her, even though I made a mess of it. By age 8, I started calling them Mom and Dad. They never asked me to, it just felt natural. They were the ones tucking me in, helping with homework, and cheering at my school events. Meanwhile, my biological parents faded into the background. I'd call them, but they never answered. I sent letters, but got no replies. Grandma occasionally heard updates about my sister's health through church friends. That was my only connection to them. Once, when I was about 9, my parents visited. I'm not sure why, maybe guilt, maybe to check a box. The visit was stiff and awkward. They didn't know how to talk to me, and I didn't know what to say to them. They felt like strangers. They stayed for an hour, then left. Afterward, my uncle hugged me and said, "You don't need to worry about them, we've got you." That's when I realized he was my real dad. My biological parents may have given me life, but they weren't raising me. Looking back, the day my father drove away from my grandparents' house split my life in two. The life I expected with my parents, and the one I built with my uncle and aunt. I'm grateful for the latter, but it left wounds. By age 9, I stopped asking about my biological parents, not because I didn't care, but because it changed nothing. Grandma would go quiet when I mentioned them, and my uncle and aunt couldn't hide their irritation, despite trying to stay neutral. I got tired of dead-end questions. At first, I kept reaching out. I'd send letters about school. "I got an A on my spelling test," or "We're studying planets, Jupiter's my favorite." Simple kid stuff, but they never wrote back. I'd check the mailbox daily, hoping, until I stopped bothering. At 10, my uncle gave me an old flip phone, no games, just calls and texts. I felt so grown-up. Sometimes I'd call my parents, thinking they'd pick up for their big kid son. They never did. I left voicemails. They never called back. One day, I asked Grandma if they'd lost my number. She gave me a sad smile and said, "They know how to reach you, dear." That hurt more than I can describe, the idea that they could contact me but chose not to. The breaking point came when I was 11. My biological parents visited for the first time in years, and I was excited. I tidied my room, combed my hair neatly, and wore a fancy shirt my aunt said made me look sharp. But when they arrived, they acted like they barely knew me, polite, like I was some acquaintance's kid. My mother gave me a cheap toy car and my father sat rigidly, asking generic questions like, "How's school going?" It was strange. I wanted to yell, "I'm your son, why don't you know me?" Instead, I gave short, awkward answers, waiting for them to leave. After they were gone, I told my uncle I didn't want to see them again. He didn't push, just said, "That's your call, kid, we've got your back." And that was it. I stopped calling, stopped writing. They didn't notice. The silence went both ways. By 12, I was done hoping. If they wanted me, they'd have to try. They didn't. What made it easier was how much my aunt and uncle, my real parents, showed up. My uncle attended every dull parent-teacher meeting. My aunt stayed up late helping with last-minute projects I'd put off. They even saved up for a Disneyland trip one summer, a huge sacrifice for us. My uncle rode Space Mountain with me despite hating rides. Meanwhile, my biological parents stayed absent. Even Grandma rarely mentioned them. If I heard anything, it was vague, like, "Your mother asked about you." But it felt empty. If she cared, why wasn't she calling? My number hadn't changed. When my sister's health declined, Grandma said they'd moved near a hospital specializing in her condition. I felt sorry for my sister, but resentment grew too. They could upend their lives for her but couldn't call me. I tried not to focus on it. My life with my uncle and aunt, my parents, was good, stable, loving. I saw Grandma and Grandpa often, and they always made me feel valued. By my teens, I'd made peace with it. My biological parents weren't my parents in the ways that mattered. My uncle and aunt had earned that role. Still, the feeling of being discarded lingered. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering if I was unlovable or insignificant. I didn't share those thoughts often, but I think my uncle and aunt knew. One night out of the blue, my uncle sat me down and said, "You know we chose you, right? You're not here because we had to take you. We wanted you." I didn't cry in front of him, teen pride, but later alone I did. That moment shifted something. I stopped seeing myself as the kid my parents left and started seeing myself as the kid my uncle and aunt chose. It changed everything. By 14, life with my aunt and uncle felt normal. They never made me feel like a burden, more like I was their greatest joy. One evening, I overheard my aunt talking to Grandma in the kitchen. "We tried everything," she said, her voice heavy. "It just wasn't meant to be." I realized they'd tried for years to have kids and couldn't. They never told me, probably to avoid making me feel like a substitute. But it explained so much. They didn't just take me in out of duty, they wanted to be parents. They wanted me. Soon after, they brought up adoption. One night after dinner, my uncle asked casually, "What if we made this official?" At first, I wasn't sure. They were already my parents in my heart. Would papers change that? But the more we talked, the more it mattered. It would be real, legally binding. They explained it wouldn't be easy. My biological parents still had rights, so there'd be lawyers, court dates, and costs. But they were ready if I was. I asked for time to think. I talked to Grandma, who said, "You know who your real family is, dear. This just makes it clear to the world." After a few months, I said, "Let's do it." The adoption process was long and draining, forms, meetings, endless waiting. My biological parents didn't fight it naturally, but the legal system was complicated. Through it all, my aunt and uncle stayed committed. They wanted me fully forever. The adoption was finalized just after my 18th birthday. I'll never forget the courtroom, the judge declaring my uncle and aunt my legal parents. It felt surreal. I didn't know how to react. Afterward, my uncle hugged me tightly, trying not to cry, and whispered, "We've always been your family. This just seals it." We celebrated at my favorite burger joint, nothing fancy, just perfect. My aunt called me her miracle kid, and my uncle joked, "You just got mailed to the wrong house at first, but we found you." That day was one of the happiest of my life. Not because it changed our bond, it didn't, but because it erased any doubt about where I belonged. It also shifted how I saw my biological parents. For years, I'd carried the pain of feeling unwanted. But that day, I realized their rejection didn't define me. My family's love did. From then on, I called my aunt and uncle Mom and Dad full-time. The first time I said, "Thanks, Mom." When my aunt handed me a plate, her face glowed. The adoption also let me fully let go of my biological parents. I'd held onto a sliver of hope they'd return, apologize, or fix things. After the adoption, I didn't need them anymore. I had everything I needed. As I started college, my parents, my aunt and uncle, were my biggest cheerleaders. They helped with financial aid forms, drove me to campus tour, and gave me a new laptop for graduation. When I moved into my dorm, my mom cried and my dad pretended he didn't. College was a fresh start. I didn't have to explain my past. No one knew about my biological parents or why my aunt and uncle were my mom and dad. I could just be me. I went home for holidays and weekends. My mom always had cookies ready, and my dad would grill me about my classes. They never stopped making me feel at home. Being adopted at 18 meant more than if it had happened earlier. I was old enough to grasp its weight. It wasn't just about being taken in, it was about being chosen. My biological parents never chose me. My real parents did. When I was 20, my sister passed away just after Thanksgiving. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in years, so the news hit oddly. I didn't cry, but a heavy weight settled in my chest. Grandma called to tell me, her voice steady but emotional. She stayed more connected to my biological parents through church, passing along occasional updates about my sister. I never asked for details. I didn't know how to feel. I wanted to mourn her, but I barely knew her. She was 14 when I was sent away, and by the time I had clear memories, I was long gone. I had vague recollections, us running around the yard, her braiding my hair, her scolding me for breaking her toy. Those were the pieces I held on to. The funeral was 2 weeks later. Grandma thought I should go for closure. I wrestled with it. I didn't want to see my biological parents, but skipping it felt wrong. My sister deserved better. I went but told Grandma to make it clear I didn't want to talk to my parents. At the service, I sat in the back, arriving late. It was a small crowd, family and a few of my sister's friends. I saw my biological parents up front. My mother was crying constantly. My father looked empty. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just emptiness. The pastor spoke of my sister's courage and kindness. I felt like an outsider at someone else's gathering. When it ended, I slipped out quickly to avoid awkward conversations. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. Days later, my biological parents called my dad, my uncle wanting to talk to me. I told him to say I wasn't available. Grandma wasn't happy with my choice, thinking I should hear them out, but she respected it. After the funeral, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I wasn't grieving my parents, but I mourned the bond I could have had with my sister. My parents, my aunt and uncle were incredible through it all. My mom checked on me gently. My dad gave reassuring pats. They knew I wasn't grieving normally, but understood it was hard. I kept thinking about my sister after the funeral. I searched old photo albums for pictures of us. There were only a few, like us playing outside or at a holiday table. Those images felt precious. I wondered about her life. Grandma said she was brave and loved by many, fighting her illness fiercely. Did she miss me? Did she think of her little brother who vanished? I'll never know, and that stings. In the weeks after, my biological parents tried again, sending a note through Grandma. I ignored it. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. The funeral didn't bring closure like Grandma hoped. It reopened old pain. But it also clarified something. My biological parents were strangers now. They gave me life but didn't raise or love me when it mattered. My real family was the one that stayed. That Christmas, the first after my sister's death, felt different. Her absence cast a shadow, but my family, my aunt, uncle, and grandma made it special. They decked out the house, baked treats, and played loud holiday music. It was warm and joyful like always. Grandma and I went to midnight mass, a tradition we kept. During the service, I felt a calm settle over me, like things might be okay. Then I sensed someone sit behind us. I caught my mother's familiar perfume and my stomach dropped. For a moment, I was 6 again, curled up as she read to me. Then anger surged. Why were they here? I didn't look back, focusing on the service, but I felt their eyes on me. When it ended, I stood to leave with Grandma, but my mother stepped in front of me. "Hi, darling," she said softly, like we'd just spoken yesterday. I froze, then said, "Sorry, do we know each other?" Her face fell, shock, then pain. My father stepped forward. "We're your parents," he said. I shook my head. "My parents are at home," I replied evenly. I turned to Grandma. "Ready to go?" She gave a small, approving nod. As we walked to the door, my mother called, "You don't recognize us?" I paused, turned, and feigned confusion. "Oh, are you my dad's cousin or something? I vaguely remember you from when I was little." My father's face flushed. My mother looked ready to cry, but I didn't feel guilty enough to stop. They had years to fix things and chose not to. Grandma held my hand in the car, silent. At home, I told my parents, my real ones, everything. My dad shook his head. "They don't get to act hurt now, not after what they did." That night, I felt a mix of victory and hollowness.